Good afternoon to everyone, and thank you for joining this week's seminar from the Living Earth Collaborative and Washington University's Evolution, Ecology, and Population Biology Group. Today, I have the great pleasure to introduce Dr. Patricia Olynyk. Dr. Olynyk was appointed inaugural director of the Unified Graduate School of Art in Florence and Frank Bush Professor of Art in the Sam Fox School of Design, Visual Arts at Washington University in 2007, and transitioned to the full-time faculty in 2020. She currently holds a courtesy appointment in the university's School of Medicine and fellowships in the Institute for Public Health and Living Earth Collaborative, both interdisciplinary hubs that facilitate research across a wide range of fields. She is also appointed in medical humanities, woman, gender, sexuality studies, and performing arts. Dr. Olynyk received her Master of Fine Arts degree with distinction from the California College of Arts, and spent 4 years as a Monbusho Scholar and Tokyo Foundation Research Scholar in Japan at the Osaka University. Dr. Olynyk has an impressive career achievements. For example, she's the recipient of numerous awards and distinctions, including a Helmut Stern Fellowship at the University of Michigan and a Francis Wood Fellowship at the College of Physicians in Philadelphia. Her work has been featured in the Venice design at Palazzo Michele dalle Colonne, the Los Angeles International Biennial, the Brooklyn Museum, the Saitama Modern Art Museum in Japan, and the Museo del Corso in Rome. Her solo exhibitions include Sensing Terrains at the National Academy of Sciences in Washington, D.C., Dark Skies at the Art Center Gallery at UCLA, and Transfigurations at Galleria Grafica Tokyo in Japan. Dr. Olynyk's photographs, prints, videos, and installations investigate science and technology-related themes and the ways in which social systems and institutional structures shape our understanding of our place in the world, working across disciplines to develop third culture projects. She often collaborates with scientists, humanists, programmers, and engineers. And the last but not the least important fact about Dr. Olynyk is that she is one of the first artists in the United States appointed to a university science unit. Before I hand it over to Dr. Olynyk, I want to remind all the audience to leave questions and comments in the YouTube chat section, and we will read them at the end of the seminar. Without further delay, let me introduce you to Professor Patricia Olynyk and her presentation entitled Eco-Art in Precarious World. Take it away, Professor Olynyk.
Wonderful, William. Thank you for that very, very generous introduction. And I'd like to thank William and Brett and everyone at the Living Earth Collaborative for this wonderful faculty fellowship at Washington University. And it is a real pleasure to be here with all of you today. And first of all, I'd like to say that, you know, eco art and what came before it, land art, environmental art, it's a vast history. And it's a vast history with multiple tentacles that go into multiple disciplines. So this talk is written with my fellows in mind, who for the most part are non-artists. This one's for you, right? So the talk will touch upon some of the key movements and players of the land and environmental art movement, the eco art movement, and these range broadly from artworks that shift our perceptions of the world around us to those that have the capacity, perhaps in some cases, to actually change policy. So it is by no means an exhaustive list of individuals I'll be speaking about today, but hopefully this will give you a little bit of a Mr. Toad's wild ride on the surface of what has been happening since the 60s. So since the second half of the 20th century, there have been many shifts in contemporary culture that respond to, not unexpectedly, the climate crisis, the loss of biodiversity globally, and the Anthropocene. And these have produced an increasing overlap of practices, methods, and various approaches across disciplines, including those that inform the landscape of eco art. And likewise, new forms of practice that explore this ever-evolving terrain, particularly those that situate work physically in various environments, impact the contemporary social, cultural, and political conditions of the present in a multitude of ways. So this talk is going to begin with looking at a few of the pioneers of the land and environmental art movement, which began in the 60s. And then we'll go ahead and discuss some of the key thinkers, curators, artists, and cultural producers that produce eco art today. And there we go. So with a clearly transdisciplinary ethos, the eco art movement includes members with diverse backgrounds who are based in fields that include art, design. Many of these people are interventionists. They involve themselves in architecture, curation, public engagement, creative regeneration, participatory design, performance, ethnography, activism, writing, filmmaking, information design, and also publishing. And one of the first publications to provide a terrific overview of land and environmental art is this compilation titled Land and Environmental Art by Jeffrey Wallace and Art Kastner. They're the editors of this publication, which was produced in '98. And it's a survey that looks at the integration, interruption, involvement, implementation, and imagining of the environment within the realm of arts practice. So land art is a practice or form of production that utilizes typically natural materials or sites in various settings in order to interact with nature in some way, or to encourage viewers to interact with nature in some way. It's sometimes known as environmental art, sometimes termed earthworks. The movement emerged in the 60s and gained momentum throughout the following decade. And on the cover of this book is a work by Christo and Jean-Claude, who were operating at a distinctive moment in American history, specifically the American environmental history. The couple wrapped the coastline of Little Bay, Prince Henry Hospital. Actually, this piece was done in Southeast Sydney, Australia, by invitation of an Australian collector, John Caldor, in '69. And the South Pacific Ocean shore included 1 million square feet of fabric, 35 miles of rope shrouding a 1.5 mile long section of the Australian coastline, and involved over 100 workers, 15 professional mountain climbers, and 11 volunteers devoted to 17,000 work hours over a period of 4 weeks to install this. And the coast remained wrapped for the period of 10 weeks from October 28th, 1969. And land art, as I've said, is a practice or form of art production that utilizes natural materials in a variety of settings, but you can see from this project that there are also human-made materials. And among the many relationships that define the human condition, the individual connection to the environment is primarily the elemental background against which all of our activity is played out. Says Jean-Claude and Christo, nature is the biggest of the big pictures as we aspire to leave our mark, inscribing our observations and gestures within the landscape, attempting to translate and transgress the space within which we find ourselves. If our culture is the manifestation of this drive, then its continuing fascination with the land is a testament to both the potential and the strictures of our terrestrial condition. So land art and environmental art are subject to both science and art, right? The landscape functions as a kind of mirror and a lens. In it, we see the space we occupy and ourselves as we occupy it. And we have consistently sought to connect on some level with the landscape. Humans have created forms in honor of the land and an act of defiance against it for millennia. So this is Valley Curtain in Colorado. It was made in '72 as a preparation for the running fence began. I'm sorry, there were two artworks here. This particular work we're looking at is Valley Curtain, and This was produced in 72 in preparation for another artwork called Running Fence. And it began with legislation and policy changes ratified in the late 60s that had just begun to take effect. And this was really reflecting America's growing awareness of their roles as custodians of the natural environment, right? So for 28 months, Christo and Jean-Claude worked with designers, builders, and students to produce this curtain. And what it was really meant to do is draw attention to the landscape in a way that would have us pay a certain kind of attention that we might not pay attention with otherwise, right? And this is often a very subtle form of kind of consciousness raising or a pivoting of attention to a particular landscape or a particular area. And this Valley Curtain certainly does that. As is true with all of their projects, the materials are removed and recycled, and the landscape is supposedly returned to its original condition. But as I'm sure you can imagine, environmentalists will frequently pipe up over these projects and say that there is impact on wildlife, certainly with the curtain and with Running Fence, which ran many, many miles across California, that migration patterns were disrupted, soil and air quality was changed, there was a new form of noise in the landscape. So there is some controversy surrounding these projects. And another person who is very, very key on the landscape of the early movement of land art is Ana Mandiata, Cuban-American born performance artist, sculptor, and painter whose work embraced a kind of reconceptualization of our relationship between human and non-human life. And this is why her work has been so enduring, that artists and cultural producers interested in the Anthropocene have continued to look back at this work that was produced in the 70s, saying that it has an enduring message. So across her 15-year career, she produced over 200 works using the land as her sculptural medium, especially in her well-known series Silhouetta, which was produced between 73 and 80, where she molded her body into different terrains in Iowa and Mexico to emphasize the inextricable link between Mother Nature and the human form. And by the way, she came to an untimely death in her 30s, which was tragic beyond belief. So what began in the 60s with a small number of committed conceptualist artists who were disenchanted with this kind of modernist art gallery model, right? The kind of objectification of and commodification of the object. These conceptualist artists were intent on measuring the power of the artwork in isolation from the culture of commodification. This is a really important point. And this has expanded over the past 60 years into a divergent collection of forms, approaches, and a variety of theoretical positions. The terms land art and environmental art are variable and they're fraught. The first manifestations of these began in New York and also the open spaces of America's Western deserts. So one can't introduce land and environmental art without introducing Robert Smithson, who produced the spiral jetty in 1970. And he began to use combinations of materials to form three-dimensional sculptural compositions on the landscape, which resulted in what he called non-sites. And he was fascinated by the concepts of duality and also entropy, right? So spiral jetty is an earthwork sculpture that was built on the northeastern shore of the Great Salt Lake near Roselle Point in Utah. It's made entirely of mud and also salt crystals and basalt rocks, and it forms a 1,500-foot long anti-clockwise coil jutting from the shore of the lake. It took 6 days to construct the multiple pieces of the work. Heavy construction machinery had to be used, and in the late 90s, Spiral Jetty had spent most of its existence actually submerged underwater until a drought caused the water level to recede, and the jetty became visible for for the first prolonged period in its history, actually. Two other pioneers of the movement, Walter de Maria, who produced the lightning field in '77, 400 stainless steel poles with solid pointed tips, arranged in a rectangular 1 mile by 1 kilometer grid array in New Mexico. It was created to communicate a range of experiences to the audience and to change perceptions of, obviously, the sky and lightning, but to change perceptions of time and space. And, you know, the idea that if you're fortunate enough to be in that field and to see lightning strike, it's a very invigorating experience, and one that, you know, probably reinvests one's understanding of being a terrestrial body on the earth. It must be a very powerful experience. And on the right, Nancy Holt's sun tunnels. So she built these between 73 and 76 on 40 acres that the artist bought in 1974, specifically for the site of the Great Basin Desert in Utah. They mark the yearly extreme positions of the sun on the horizon, the tunnels being aligned with the angles rising and setting of the sun on the days of the solstices around June 21st and December 21st. So on those days, the sun is actually centered through these tunnels and is nearly in the center for about 10 days before and after the solstices. So again, this is a way of framing the landscape that shifts one's experience, hopefully more than momentarily, with the landscape. And another early pioneer who is whose work is revisited frequently is Agnes Dennis, who just had a wonderful retrospective exhibition at the Shed in New York a few years ago. In 1982, a 2-acre wheat field was planted on a landfill in Lower Manhattan, 2 blocks from Wall Street and the World Trade Centers. 200 truckloads of dirt were brought in and seeds were sown by hand. And then the field was maintained for 4 months and harvested to yield over 1,000 pounds of healthy golden wheat. And this was a symbolic work that represented food, energy, commerce, world trade, economics, mismanagement, waste, world hunger, and ecological concerns. And it called our attention to the misplaced priorities that we have in this world as the wheat traveled to 28 cities around the world in an exhibition called the International Art Show for the End of World Hunger. It was organized by the Minnesota Museum of Art, and a questionnaire was composed of existential questions concerning human values and the quality of life. So by now, all of these artists were well aware of Rachel Carson's Silent Spring, published in 1962, which revealed the catastrophic impact of pesticides on the environment, particularly on bird populations. And Carson accused the chemical industry of minimizing the threat posed by the use of harmful toxins in public, officials of complicity for their lack of oversight. So a lot of the artists were sort of responding to this burgeoning ecological activist movement. So we're going to fast forward a little bit. This is a curator and writer and theorist I had the good fortune of hosting at Washington University a few years ago, Sue Spade, who's a Belgian-based writer and philosopher, and she's been active in the art world as a collector, curator, and writer for many years. She's been the author of 5 books on art and ecology, and coined in '99 the term ecovention, which combines ecology and invention, describes artist-initiated projects that employ an inventive strategy to physically transform an ecosystem. So now we're getting into activities that are meant to have a kind of transformative set of properties to them. So ecovention juxtaposes interesting ecological facts alongside case studies of projects that artists have realized in tandem with scientists and community members. So the work becomes really much more collaborative, and this is a copy of a cover of her book, which has actually been pinched from my library at school twice. So that's a real a backhanded compliment. And this is a work by Jean-Francois Parquet. And since 2012, he has been involved in urban farming projects. And he has perfected the portager, a portable potager, whose portability allows for biointensive farming and multi-species coexistence. And he crafts his own artisanal soils, and he adds drainage, enabling the recycling of water. So we can see by some of the artists that Sue Spade has worked with that there's a new push to engaging the landscape and flora and fauna in a way that involves regeneration and recycling. And so what's really pretty astounding about her book, Echovention, is that she's really trying to cover artists who are building strategies to restore habitat, reclaim water, and conserve species. And she was struck by one statistic that she came across, and that is that of the 9 countries where 60% of the world's remaining 6,500 languages are spoken, 6, and they include Mexico, Brazil, Indonesia, India, Zaire, and Australia. They are also centers of mega diversity for flora and fauna. So from this statistic, she infers that biodiversity and cultural diversity are directly proportional. And inspired by this notion, she later devised 3 corollaries derived from related facts, which she terms the protect, respect, multiply mantra. The first fact is a breadth of human languages correlates with biodiversity. The corollary, human beings who value their culture protect their natural environment. The second fact, languages tend to survive where diverse species thrive. The corollary is respect for habitat encourages cultural diversity and biodiversity. And the third fact, biodiversity is relational and interactional with human beings, and the corollary is mixing it up, difference and convergence compound biodiversity. So her ethos is learning to protect life, and she talks about both the conquistadors and extinction to Black Lives Matter, and learning to value ecological and cultural diversity. She does a lot of online writing, so if you're interested in these topics, if you Google her name, a lot of good writing will come up. So she says, the ruthless take no prisoners approach of the conquistadors can be linked to both, I'm sorry, part of my screen is cut off here, soil depletion and police brutality. I think it's soil depletion and police brutality, demonstrating how our disrespect for the most vulnerable among us inevitably endangers everyone, unless everyone adopts new habits. For ecological and cultural diversity, we will remain conquistadors, readily destroying whatever we can't extract for profit simply because we don't understand its value. This same take no prisoners approach inspired civilized Europeans to destroy local farm and built seafaring vessels, carve mountains to construct glorious cathedrals, and roam the lands in search of profitable resources to extract, eventually wreaking havoc on biodiversity. This is from her essay on Breathe, and the image that you're seeing there is let's see if I have, sorry, I cannot access the name of the artist at this moment. So, sorry, George Steinman, who's producing Symbiosis of Responsibility, Blues for the Glaciers. So he's actually playing music on a glacier. So what ended up happening with all of this discrete activity with different authors and different artists is that artists began to coalesce into these groups, and have the good fortune of belonging to both the Echo Art Network and Echo Art Space. Echo Art Network was established in '99 by Lynn Hull, Don Krug, Bailey Oates, Aviva Romani, and Susan Leibowitz Steinman. And it's a loose affiliation of more than 200 invitational members from diverse nations and disciplinary backgrounds who are concerned with creative disciplinary approaches to sustainable futures. via ecological art practices, projects, research, and initiative. And so it's very broadly defined. They want to focus attention on the web of interrelationships within the environment, create artworks that employ natural materials or engage with environmental forces, reclaim, restore, and remediate natural environments, inform the public about ecological dynamics and the problems we face, and further re-envision ecological relationships, creatively proposing new possibilities for coexistence. And Eco Art Space was conceived in '97 by Patricia Olynyk in LA at a venue where visitors could learn about the principles of ecology through immersive environments. And then she published one of the first websites as a directory for artists addressing environmental issues. And then in '99 partnered with East Coast curator Amy Lipton, who we just lost in 2020, combining forces working from both coasts. So this began to gather this kind of groundswell of energy and activity. Both of these groups, I think, were really key. One of the members is Brandon Ballinger, who creates incredible transdisciplinary artworks inspired from his ecological field and laboratory research. And in '96, a central investigation focus had been the occurrence of developmental deformities and population declines among amphibians and other ectothermic vertebrates. So in 2001, he was nominated for membership into Sigma 9, the Scientific Research Society. And he shortly thereafter published Explanation for Missing Limbs and Deformed Amphibians. And in the Journal of Experimental Zoology, he received an international media attention from the BBC and others with a scientific study that was the inspiration for another book, The Occurrence of Deformities in Amphibians. So here you really see a true transdisciplinary artist who is, he has his PhD at Plymouth University in association with Zurich Hochschule, and he is a conservation leadership fellow at National Audubon Society's Together Green program. So truly working in a cross and transdisciplinary way to produce his artwork, which is producing data and research for the scientific community as well. So I'm not working currently with living systems, but I did want to talk a little bit about the role of technology in the making of works that involve creatures and plants and the environment. And I've always been interested peripherally about the implications of the techno-human interface and about immersion and the notion that an embodied experience through the senses is how we actually think. We actually think by the way that we feel. And the body is an entire sense organ. It's kind of its own anechoic chamber. And we seek to produce work that those of us using technology and natural form seek to produce work that shifts our attention from form to experience, right? From, again, moving away from the artwork as the discrete form to the experience of something. Psychological soundscapes, awareness of interconnected networks, complex systems at varying scales. So my objective is to direct attention and to create, in some cases, a kind of sense of wonder that can resensitize us in a way that will lead to shifts in perception and behavior towards empathy and caretaking. So a few years ago, I had a solo exhibition at the National Academy of Sciences and produced a body of work that began with my interest in the fact that we live in a technology mediated world that increasingly desensitizes us, but that I could actually use technology in an interesting way to try to resensitize us. The work is meant to call viewers to expand their awareness of the worlds they inhabit, whether those worlds are their bodies or the environment around them. And I began by making these large-scale electron micrographic works that combine imagery from scanning electron microscopy and Japanese gardens that were composed and constructed specifically for the purposes of enhancing sensation. And there's also a sound installation in this piece because I'm interested in activating more than one sensory experience of the artwork. So this evocative soundscape is triggered by 5 separate speakers that were installed in the rotunda of the National Academy of Sciences, and they were, again, sounds drawn from recordings I made during several research trips to Japan. And they evoke the sound of blood coursing through the body, a heartbeat, a trance-like hum of Buddhist chants. But by mixing all of these scanning electron micrographs of sites of sensation on different bodies, right? What you see on the left is the inner ear cochlea of the guinea pig. What you see on the right is a Drosophila fly, a Drosophila eye that I have visualized. But there are tissue samples that represent sight, smell, taste, touch, and sound. And part of the meaning of this work is meant to draw the viewer's attention to the fact that the state of being sensate is not uniquely human. So as Caroline Jones, professor of history, theory, and criticism at MIT posits, amplified, shielded, channeled, prosthetized, simulated, stimulated, irritated, our sensorium is more mediated today than ever before. The situation gives us time for reflection, a propitious moment for artists, cultural workers, and all viewers alike to interpret, think, and reckon with the sense of our mediated sensorium. So these are a few more images. These are 10 feet high. They've also been printed on Chinese silk to form this kind of sea anemone form. And this is the installation at the National Academy of Sciences rotunda. And these other artworks are in the hallway leading up to the rotunda. And you can see more of this work on my website. And again, something that would have allowed me to work with living systems in the time that I was teaching at the University of Michigan in the early 2000s, I was commissioned by the Mathi Botanical Garden to design a 6,500 square foot plaza. And the piece involved a lot of hand drawing and computer modeling. And it was inspired in part by Darcy Thompson's book on growth and form. And I was looking at different labyrinthine gardens, which tend to have very regular geometric shapes. But they're all meant to really create a set of, like a singular pathway, a unicursal pathway to allow the walker to center herself or himself or themselves. So I deviated from the traditional pathway and designed this labyrinth on the repetitive rotational spiral and bilateral symmetries of the angel wing begonia leaf, which is an indigenous plant. And this is the design I produced. And many aspects of the morphology of organisms, including plants, follow simple geometric formula. The design responds to my sense that the advent of new technologies, ecological politics, and recent developments in the life sciences have affected the ways in which we see nature and structures and how we also experience our environment. And another work that is inspired by a real ecological problem is Dark Skies, which is a multimedia, multisensory collaboration with Sung-Ho Kim and Axiomi, and also Christopher Ottinger, a graduate of our MFA program in the Sam Fox School. And it was recently exhibited at the California Nanosystems Institute at UCLA, but also at EcoArt Network, and then as a large-scale screening for the Ceylan Media Festival in St. Petersburg, Russia. But it's a work that is that has grown out of my concern with light pollution and the recognition that in fact, you know, we have a huge problem with light glare and the abundance of light impacting not only humans, but all life forms, particularly nocturnal life forms. And add to this that we have a plethora of communication satellites in the skies, which are assumed to clutter the night skies. And this is eventually going to conceal our view of outer space. And likewise, aliens will not be able to see our Earth either, because we'll have so many satellites flying around. So the International Dark Sky Association defines light pollution as the omnipresence of obtrusive artificial light, which, as we know, affects brainwave activity. It affects circadian rhythms, migratory birds, predators, prey, all nocturnal ecology is affected. And life-sustaining behaviors that involve reproduction, nourishment, sleep, and protection from predators are all impacted. And many creatures, including amphibians, birds, mammals, insects, and plants, are deeply impacted by the loss of darkness. And so aside from the loss of stars being in view, light pollution has quantifiably dangerous effects. And one model of Los Angeles suggests that light pollution destroys 7% of smog-eating chemicals that build up in the dark. So this leads to a 5% jump in wheeze-inducing ozone pollution during the day. So this is another reason why at the micro level that we can't see, there's huge damage being done. And here's the International Dark Sky Association map showing the omnipresence of light pollution in different locations. And there have been numerous blackouts around the world. There was one in Canada. This is actually an image from the one in Canada. But there was also one in '94. There was a 6.7 magnitude earthquake that crashed the power grid in Northridge citywide, and the sky was flush with this kind of silvery cosmic set of bodies. And it was so sinister that the populations called 911. So I started with one of those scanning electron micrographs, the wild mouse taste bud. We modeled it, Sung Ho Kim and I modeled it to abstract it, and then we created a CNC routed wall, which is not environmentally friendly, I realize, and a dual projection system. And what I'm trying to do here is actually show the cinematic moment when the sun is going down over and over again. On one projection coming from the left, on the projection coming from the right, you see night sky and the Milky Way, and you could only see two evening sky. You could only see a crepuscular sky and a night sky simultaneously by way of technology. So here's where technology comes in. And there's a soundscape to this as well. And Christina Albu, a historian and writer, says that dark skies has the potential to trigger affective alliances between participants and the projections of a habitat quivering with life. It plays on the precariousness of human presence within the world and its contingence upon biological systems that are not always visible. So the implication into other worlds is what happens when your shadow interrupts one of the two projections, and you are then suddenly implicated into this multi-species world. So again, more information is available on this on my website. Victoria Vesna, director of the Art Sci Center at UCLA and also professor of design media arts, also uses a lot of technology in her work. And very briefly, because I'm trying to be mindful of time, this piece, Noise Aquarium, which was shown at Ars Electronica a few years back, addresses the fact that current scientific studies have shown that noise sources such as sonar and fracking are extremely harmful to large marine life, but we don't think about what it's doing to small marine life. So she worked with modelers from a scientific visualization lab at Angewandte in Vienna, and a whole lot of a big interdisciplinary team of zoologists and visualization strategists to produce this work. And one version of the work has you standing on a platform, and you have to balance equally in this platform in order for this small organism that has been writ enormous, whale size, in order for it to survive. So it's trying to build a connection between the balance of the human and the balance of the ecosystem. And one can't talk about environmental art or eco art without talking about the Newton and Helen Meyer Harrison, referred to as the Harrisons. And their concept of art embraces an amazing range of disciplines. They engage with historians, diplomats, ecologists, emissaries, art activists, and their work involves proposing actual solutions to environmental problems and an extensive mapping and documentation of the proposals that they also produce. So this is a past work that is called Peninsula Europe, and it was done in 2003, and it was invited by Expo 2000 to examine the future of the landscape of Europe. And they view the Peninsula of Europe as a geographical network of drain basins that, with the restoration of forest, meadows, and grasslands in high grounds, could actually purify the region's waters of the European Union and other institutions, and other produce other environmental protections for the German government. So it's work that really seeks to change the environment and change policy. And here's another work, which is part of their study for the force majeure, a center that they founded. And it's a collaboration with scientists at UC Santa Cruz and botanists and other artists and scientists who wanted to produce these trial gardens with domes. And the goal of Future Garden was to determine which plants are best able to thrive in as the region warms up, and how to create the scaffolding for a more rapid adaptation of the local ecosystem as our climate shifts. So the work is really seeking to have real impact. And this is a good friend and an amazingly influential person in the eco art world. Her name is Linda Weintraub, and she just did a talk for the Institute for Cultural Activism International called, it was on a podcast called The Tuning Fork, as part of the John M. Anderson Endowed Lecture Series at Penn State. And her talk focused on the stewardship of the world and biodiversity and the urgency to take action. She says the future is a potent topic. The situation is very precarious. All of this is fraught with moral and mortal dilemmas, and also personal projections. Eco art isn't one thing, but it's about the stewardship and protection of the environment. The fauna and the flora should be nurtured. We need to reconcile with notions of impermanence. And she really made a remarkable statement in her lecture the other day. She said that the garden that grows with the decomposition of the body is in fact the enduring mark. So she's really advocating for moving away from what many of us are working with, which is a kind of documentation of a project which we show in the world. And she's saying, forget the documentation, action is really what's important here. And you'll understand her comment about the decomposition of the body in a few moments. We will circle back to this idea. She says not another single form of contemporary art thinks this way, and she's absolutely right. So she's against the kind of legacy of documentation in favor of action and something she calls mutation activism. So what she does is she every few years moves on, and in each time she purchases land with her husband, she builds one of these houses. She begins by foraging from the land, and I have visited her in Rhinebeck many times at this location, and moving beyond foraging from the land to add diversity to the land. So she has beehives, and she raises all of her own animals, grows all of her own plants. Everything is harvested in the autumn, and they live off of everything that they raise. So she's really interested in the kind of life cycle, and has just moved again to, where did she move to? Maine, maybe Massachusetts. She's further north now. So, but what's extraordinary about her is that she has written a lot of really terrific books that many of us use in the classroom. The one on the left, I endorsed, particularly because it is the first textbook that really lays out the history of eco art issues, and you can see how this chart connects various artists and designers and cultural producers with various forms of action. Here are the approaches that they use, and they range from social ecology to industrial ecology to conservation to sustainable development. And then here are some of the strategies. The work is meant to instruct, intervene, visualize, metaphorize, activate, celebrate, perturb, dramatize, satirize, and investigate. This is a must-have book for anyone interested in art and ecology. And the first one, as I say, that lays out the history and the strategy so comprehensively for not only the artist, but the lay audience. Somebody else I've been in touch with recently, Aviva Romani, produced a project that went on for years. This is a remarkable work that I'm hoping attendees today will turn their attention to online. This is called Blued Trees, based on a case study in eco art defined here as art integrated with ecological habitat intended to avert ecocide. As the international legal discourse surrounding ecocide evolved in the 70s, interest from artists engaged with environmental issues also accelerated and contributed to the rise of eco art. The concept of ecocide gained legal traction since the 70s, when bioethicist Arthur Galston first pronounced an ecological equivalent of ecocide with the word genocide. So I'll try, it is a very involved project, but a small group of anti-fracking activists reached out to artists, and the artists were inspired by an example that they found by Canadian artist Peter von Teisenhausen, who managed to discourage pipeline corporations. He halted pipeline development on his land by copyrighting his entire ranch in Alberta, Canada. However, that premise had not been tested in any court system. An activist showed Romani the trajectory of the Constitution pipeline and how it was planned to cross New York State, and she immediately visualized a line of music hundreds of miles long through that corridor, which synesthesically articulated by tree notes the entire length of the proposed expansion. So she decided to work together with individuals who reached out to her and to other artists who were threatened landowners who knew that they were going to lose their land to development. So she took a law class at UC San Diego in the 70s on copyright, trademark, and patent law. This was before the Blue Tree Project began. And the cases and discussions really stuck in her mind as appropriation and other challenges to the legal system in this case subsequently unfolded. And she began thinking for some time about the distinction between site-specific art on one hand, which is not covered or protected by the Visual Artists' Right Act of 1990, known as VARA, and the term ecological art, which is defined as integral to specific ecosystems. So she was very smart in looking at terminology and using terminology and perpetrating actions that would be recognized by VARA. And VARA, it really, it's a law granting certain rights to artists for the protection of moral rights. So under VARA, works of art that meet certain requirements afford their authors additional rights to the works. And regardless of any subsequent physical ownership of the work itself, or regardless of who holds the copyright to the work. So this idea of conflating copyright and eminent domain law was a compelling answer to what makes this project a really distinct genre whose very form challenges our notions of capitalism and anthropocentrism. So basically what she did was she painted these trees blue with these different musical notes. And the status of the trees changed. And that change in status allowed them to be granted a kind of protection status. So, so you can see these cows are probably a little bit confused. The blue marks are actually musical notes that stretch the entire length of this development. And you can see the cows here also think it's a precarious world, but it's an incredible strategy that she used. Here's the music that she wrote for Blue Trees. There's a map of the corridor and where the location of the artwork is. And I mean, this is such a involved project that involves, you know, the very legal, you know, definitions that have legal and copyright law behind them. It involves treaty rights, watershed communities, tribal partners. All of her maps she's put up online, so you can find these. And then what's incredible is that she did a mock trial held at the Cardozo School of Law and also here at Yeshiva University. She's done several, and she's got a copyright lawyer. Judge April Neubauer is presiding. She's got a copyright lawyer, Gail Elston, deposing her, and real lawyers are arguing the legal theory based on the testimony of witnesses, evidence, and they come up with a real jury decision about whether or not this land is protected based on the Blue Trees project. So as I say, it's much more involved than I can give it justice in this talk. So I hope you will give it a bit of time and attention. And I'm aware that we are running out of time. I want to briefly introduce Jae Rim Lee, who is the artist and founder of the Infinity Burial Project. She's been working to find a hybrid mushroom that can decompose bodies and metabolize toxins, turning corpses into nutrient-rich soil. Using her own hair, nails, and skin cells as food for her mushroom, she developed the best mushroom variety for the job, called the Infinity Mushroom. She says that dyeing is very hard on the environment because we typically have embalming fluid in our bodies. You know, then there's the casket, there's pesticides in the cemetery, there's mercury in our fillings, there's even if you, you know, are going to be incinerated, cremated, there's, you know, carbon monoxide released into the environment, there's soot, there's all sorts of problems. So she's a big proponent of this mushroom suit, which she says is not only functional, but very chic. It's made out of organic cotton and seeded with mushroom spores. And what's interesting about this is that she is sort of making a case that bodies in the 21st century are full of so many toxins that this is the best way for us to be buried. And there's a lot of support for this. Many people, including I think Luke Perry, the celebrity, agreed to be buried in one of these suits. But Dr. Billy Campbell, co-founder of the first conservation burial ground, is pushing back on this a little bit. He says that organisms like soil, bacteria, insects, and nematodes all take part in the decomposition process earlier than fungi do. Therefore, the complex biology of decomposition and mushroom ecology makes it difficult to design a better system than what nature already has. So, you know, the impulse to make a better way to dispose of our dead, I think, is really a it's a great project. And here's the mushroom suit again. Last but not least, I just wanted to mention, I came upon a review essay by Mary Jo Argerstone, a PhD on the Eco Art Network, one of the organizations I belong to. And she's doing research on ecological art and Black Americans' relationships to the land. The artwork we're looking at is by Torkwase Dyson, and it's called Water Table. And in this series, he transforms, Dyson transforms geologic cartographic systems into abstractions of Earth's interconnected layers, exploring how natural and human devised borders and structures impact Black bodies and psyches. But what Mary Jo was interested in was reviewing these different books, and in her research to try to advance her own white supremacy, self-education, she came across a number of books, and I'm just going to present two of them. One is by Dakota Taylor's mammoth accomplishment called Toxic Communities, Environmental Racism, Industrial Pollution, and Residential Mobility. And it really talks about Black landscapes from invisibility and erasure to kind of vivid, instructive presence, and how this vacillates back and forth, and how natural resources and the environment are all entangled in this, and why people of color predominantly live in polluted, health risky places, and that Black communities continue to be affected by toxic industrial processes and waste. And the second book that she is very inspired by is the African American eco-literary traditions, which explicates the first person accounts of fiction and poetry, providing real stories of Black communities. And Ruffin contends that land has been experienced by Black people in the United States both as a burden and also as beauty. She argues that the burden experience has resulted in the marginalization of Black people in relation to the environmental movement's call to responsible action. And she asserts that marginalized Black people are unlikely to address the damaged land and rapidly deteriorating biodiversity of areas beyond the places they inhabit, because they will have little interest in ecological duties and responsibilities if flaws in human ethics continue to go unaddressed. So two books you might want to look at that I think will be very instructive for all of us. If you've got any questions, feel free to email me, and that is it.
Thank you so much. That was a really fascinating and interesting seminar. And for me, especially, it's a different eye-opening of how we see the world in general and how we integrate and see science in particular. Mm-hmm. We have some questions here in the chat. So this is the question from Jonathan Lossos. Mm-hmm. Thank you for tuning in. So he says, very thought-provoking. As you know, the LLC has many biologists and conservationists. Mm-hmm. How can we get involved with environmental artists?
Oh, wow. You know what? You will have a lineup out the door, down the street, and around the perimeter of the city. I think artists are very eager to work with environmentalists and biologists who are interested in this material, because it's really the kind of what grows out of those very concentrated but also serendipitous conversations. It's what grows out of that creates the project. And, of course, rapport with collaborators happens over time. I'll put myself out there. I'm very, very interested in several projects moving forward. And, again, as I said at the beginning of my talk, my primary objective in putting this lecture together is to connect with my fellow fellows. So for anybody who's inspired by this, please get in touch, drop me an email. But I would say there's just so many ways. I co-run the New York Laser program in New York with Ellen K. Levy. And this is part of the Leonardo group, which grew out of MIT. And we have many scientists and many environmentalists presenting their work at these salons. Victoria Vesna runs the same salon at UCLA for the West Coast. And this is often the way that these groups come together. I also received Scandalaris Center for Entrepreneurship money a few years ago to put together an Art Sci Fellows group to host a series of salons. So I would say the most immediate and on the ground thing we could do here is, Jonathan, I would be happy to work with you to put together the Art Sci, the LES artist salon group here. And, there's sort of a joke that we used to make that after one glass of wine, all the disciplines disappeared, but we can use the Scandalaris Center funding funded project that I already did with the Department of Philosophy and PNP, and we can use that model to bring people together here on campus. And I would love to work with you on that.
Wonderful. And as William said, yeah, absolutely fantastic talk. I think this is the first time that we've had, it's ironic, we've had such a huge overwhelming focus on just environmentalism in general, right? You talked across so many different subdisciplines of conservation, such as sensory pollution and also poisons in the ground, poisons in the air. But I am curious about the light pollution side of your work. And I'm wondering, I know you tried to model light pollution in a museum setting. Have you, or a gallery setting, have you tried to do any light pollution work out in the environment? Or has any artist tried to do any kind of light pollution to bring awareness to light pollution in the environment?
No, it's a great question, because I realize right now that the Dark Skies project is in its first iteration. So I usually start with a kickoff project, and then I continue to advance that project in some other way. I'm a little bit at an impasse myself. I'm not sure how to make the next step in this project. I had the good fortune of visiting 2 visual strategists at Caltech in Pasadena a few years ago, David Delgado and Joe Goods, who's made the, I'm trying to think, Orbit Pavilion, which was shown at the Huntington Galleries. And it basically fed, that was another piece I could have shown. There were so many works I could have shown, but it basically used satellite data in an ambisonic sound Nautilus shell shaped piece of architecture. And David said, you need to do a residency for just a couple of weeks and just brainstorm with people and figure out how to take this to the next step. So right now the project is very much residing in the realm of representation. And although it's a very meditative piece and it really is arresting to people, I don't know that the message of the problems with light pollution really comes through so clearly. And I don't want it to be a strictly didactic piece, but I do want to take it to the next stage. And I'm also interested not only in studying light pollution, but darkness. And I know that that's a very nebulous thing to study, but it has...
No, it's not nebulous at all. No.
Good. Okay, well, we'll talk.
Yes, perfect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Really excited. I'm also excited to join this LEC Salon of Art, and people in the audience are really excited. So Kyra Krakus, she said, I'm super interested in these salons. And also Jonathan Losso said, let's do it. So you have people in the audience already excited about it.
I'm excited too. I have to say that the Art Sci Fellows group that I hosted for 2 years culminated in a symposium on art and the brain, and I brought 5 of my fellows over to UCLA at the end, and it resulted in ongoing conversations and collaborations. So Jonathan, I'll be in touch.
Unfortunately, it is time to go. Thank you, Professor Olynyk, for joining us today and for sharing your fantastic work with us. And thanks to the audience for tuning in. We hope you can join us next week, and have a good afternoon.
Thank you so much. Are we off the air?